Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Learn How to Shorten Time to Market for New Medical Devices. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm the VP of Products at Parasoft, and I'll be emceeing today's webinar. And I'm joined by our partners from Velentium, and we're very excited to talk about this topic with you guys today. So first things first, though, I'm sure everybody is very familiar with Zoom now, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So far, all of the attendee microphones are off. If you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A box. I will be monitoring the Q&A as well as the chat over the course of today's webinar. So if you've got any problems, post it in the chat. If you've got any questions, post it in the Q&A session. Just make sure that everybody can hear me and see my screen correctly. Could you go ahead and just raise your hand or put a comment in the chat? Great, fantastic. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciate it. So just a little bit about Parasoft before we jump into talking about the primary topic today of medical devices and how we can streamline FDA compliance. Parasoft has been leading the industry in continuous quality and automated software testing for over 3 decades now. We have a very strong portfolio of technologies covering everything from deep code analysis focused on reliability and security, through unit testing for developers, as well as through API testing, web UI testing, and service virtualization for emulation of your test environment. We bring all of these products together into one unified software continuous quality suite. We have built these from the ground up, so they all are tightly integrated, and we have a very deep technical background within the organization. In fact, we're on the working groups for both MISRA C and MISRA C++. One of the key things that makes Parasoft solutions so compelling and strong is our partnerships, though. We have both technology partnerships as well as service partnerships, which is what we're going to be talking about today with Velentium. Now, obviously, the technology areas or application of the Parasoft technologies is very broad. And when we talk about safety critical industries, we're talking about everything from aerospace and automotive to railway, functional safety in general. But what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be really focusing on medical devices and how you can streamline that process of achieving FDA compliance. And this is where our partnership with Velentium is super important. Our partnership with Velentium brings together both the Parasoft test automation tools for, as I said, everything from code analysis through unit testing and beyond, along with Velentium's highly experienced technical staff, enabling teams to, or enabling organizations to shorten the time to market and ensure compliance with the FDA compliance requirements, as well as IEC 62304. Now, with that being said, I'd like to hand over today to our partners from Velentium. I'll hand over to Dan first, and then we'll have Christopher kind of take the ball from there. So Dan and Christopher, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. So Christopher, you should be able to take over.
That's great. And this is Dan. Thank you for that introduction.
Fantastic.
We'll talk a little bit about the company that my co-founder Tim Carroll and I founded 8.5 years ago. And so jumping right into Velentium, first and foremost, it starts with our passion. And so the passion at Velentium is to change lives for a better world. And so we talked about that at length, Tim and I, when we were founding the company. And we just kept coming back to that our goal is to change lives. Our goal is to make a difference in the world. And so when we say we exist to change lives, there's no better way to do that in our mind than in med device. And so that's what our firm does. First and foremost is medical device development as well as medical device test. And so when we're developing firmware and hardware for new devices that are going to hit the market, we needed a suite to do software and firmware test. And so we looked at the variety of software and firmware test tools out on the market, and we had to have one that could give us the security, the safety, and the quality standards all in one tool. And we found that with Parasoft. And so our devices have treated all kinds of different chronic and different human conditions. You see them on the left there. And it's been really fun to, as we do recruiting, we say, you don't have to go to one device company and treat one condition. You could come work for us and treat all of them. And so it's a thrilling world to work in where we can make a complete difference and change lives for a better world. We also talk a lot around our company around our 3 values. Our 3 values are honorable, results plus plus, and humble charisma, but it starts with honorable. We do right for right's sake. And if we're going to comply with the medical device standards, that's one thing, but it goes beyond compliance. We want to do the right thing. And so the only way to really do the right thing is to know when your code is correct. And so as we looked at the different software standards out there that we had to comply with, and then the tools that help us comply, we were drawn to Parasoft because it was the one that would do static analysis and unit testing in one tool. It allows us to assure that when we say we do right for right's sake, that we truly have done that. On the results plus plus side, we say we do the job and then some. That you remember at the end of an engagement with our firm, if we're going to do device test or we're going to do device development for you, you remember not just that we did the job, but that experience was pleasurable, that we did the job and then some. And so as we look at that, it's important to us that our tool sets are all integrated. In this industry, we talk about CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous development. The fact that Parasoft works with our other tool sets when we're doing builds with Jenkins, et cetera, is really key to us, that as we're doing development, we can do it rapidly, but we can also do it thoroughly. And then finally, humble charisma. We strive to be the kind of people that you want to be around. I like to say that at the end of an engagement, it was human to human interaction that happens. And so if you're going to work with us and our team day in and day out for months on end, we want you to walk away from that engagement going, wow, those are great people to work with. And so that's the passion, and our values are the ways that we work. And then built into our name is speed. So Velentium is made up of 3 different words: velocity, momentum, and ingenium, which is the Latin word for talent. And so it's important to us that when you engage with us for device development, or you engage for us for device test, that not only are we acting according to our passion and our values, but that we're acting with speed. And so faster and high quality, I need both in order to align with our name. And so safer with more compliance and more speed, I need both in order to align with our name. And we've been thrilled with our partnership with Parasoft as a result of that. And one of the ways that we have displayed that speed over the last 5 weeks is very personal to me, because I've spent the last 5 weeks either in Washington State or in Kokomo, Indiana. And I'll come back to that slide in a second. Chris, go to the next one, we'll come back. And we did what we call Project V, and you've probably heard about it in the news. General Motors partnered with Ventec Life Systems, which is a company that we've served some time. And they went out to Ventec in Washington, and I met them on March the 20th of this year. And their idea was to scale what's being done at Ventec by 66 times at a shuttered plant in Kokomo, Indiana. So the plant that had been closed for multiple years was turned upside into a working ventilator plant inside of 21 days. And so our company did all of the test systems for that project. And it was unbelievable. We had a team of 7 on site, but we had a team of about 100 working on these systems. And it was amazing to see 138 different test stands show up in just a matter of weeks. And that's the kind of productivity that we have been preparing ourselves for culturally. And then all of a sudden we had an opportunity to stretch our collective muscle, if you will. And it was remarkable to see that with the tool sets that we've aligned around, the ability to pull that off. And so what do we do? Let's go back one slide. There are 9 different areas that we service. And those 9 areas are human factors. So working with device developers on how their device interacts with nurses and doctors or patients. Then working to cybersecurity, which we'll talk a lot about today, making sure that all this device development is compliant, but also safe from a cybersecurity perspective. And then automated test rounds out that top row. That Tim and I both come out of the test industry. He worked for a med device company in test, and I worked for National Instruments for my first few years in industry. And so we both come from the test industry, and then we've migrated into product development over time. But assuring that all of the devices that are hitting the market work at the design level, and then work at the challenge test level, and finally work at the manufacturing level to assure that every device that goes out the door matches that device that was approved. Then as you get into program development or project development, electrical design and firmware down the left side on column 1, doing board design for devices and then writing all the firmware for devices. And that firmware, it's great to have the ability to write firmware, check it in, challenge test it, and see the next morning, here's the problems that we have with that firmware so you can fix it continuously. Then going across the bottom row, mobile apps and cloud, that increasingly devices are connected, and they're connected to an ecosystem, but they're also connected to the patient's desire to see that data. And so more and more, we need a secure architecture that allows the device that is either worn or implanted or interacted with in a hospital to hit the cloud, then hit mobile device and report. Going on the right side is mechanical design, that all of these electronics and firmware need to be put into cases. And so we do that design as well. And it's all tied together with what we call systems engineering. Systems engineering and cybersecurity work hand in hand because it's an understanding of the system to perceive risk, both from a cybersecure perspective, but then also from hazards and hazard analysis for risk, and then ways to tie all of these different parts together into one cohesive unit. We found that there was a need in the marketplace to have a firm that understood all of these different aspects of medical device design and then be a one-stop shop to deliver them. We deliver them all if you want them all, or we can come alongside you and do just parts. And that's one of the reasons that we align with Parasoft around training. So there's a need in the marketplace. Parasoft and Velentium have partnered for us to bring training on the Parasoft tool set so that if you want to do it yourself, we're happy to do that. We can train you on how to do it. Or if you'd like us to do it for you, we could do that as well. And so throughout this 8.5-year process, I feel like the culture, what we've tried to address in the marketplace, like you see on this slide, has all aligned in that Project V on the next slide. Once again, it's been a remarkable deal. If you see that slide in the upper right, some kids of one of the workers, one of the assemblers there in Kokomo, Indiana, took a bed sheet and wrote, "We think you can, we think you can, we think you can." And it was really cool to have that show up that day and know that, quite honestly, with our culture, our drive, and then the tools like the Parasoft tool suite, that we know we can. And with that, I'll hand it off to Chris. You can go on and tell us about how the secure development lifecycle plays into the Parasoft tool set and success in the med device industry.
Thank you, Dan. My name's Chris Gates, and I'm a medical device developer for over 4 decades, mostly class 3 medical devices. And however, I was also a hacker since college. The last 10 years of my career has mostly been focused on securing medical devices and training medical device manufacturers and their staff in how to secure their medical device in a way that's workable, can sit inside of your design goals, can be tracked, can integrate, as Dan was saying, through the systems engineering groups, and have repeatable processes that will not inhibit the speed of the development of your project. In fact, it will make your project better. You cannot have security until you have quality. And these types of tools bring you that way up to the point where security can be implemented. So they're wonderful tools to use. They really do help. You'll be a lot prouder of the products you would create. They won't be showing up on the news in a negative context. They will be something you can be proud of and know that people aren't going to be harmed because it was some very insecure device. So I'm this weird, odd hybrid of a developer and a hacker. And I have been doing this for so many years that I work with many of the standards bodies and regulatory agencies to define standards and tools and techniques, including HISAC, MITRE, FDA, IEEE, Bluetooth Special Interest Group, Department of Commerce, and TIA. And I co-wrote a book on medical device cybersecurity. So, Yeah, this is what I live and breathe every day now, is security, even though my background is as an embedded developer. The new normal for medical device manufacturers. Well, we've heard a lot lately about new normal, but this has nothing to do with COVID-19 and everything to do with incorporating cybersecurity best practices into the medical device manufacturer's total product lifecycle. How do we do this in a manner that still allows a device to be created in a reasonable length of time? And to explain this, how did we get here to begin with? And I kind of have to back up a little bit and do a bit of a retrospective. Back in 2014, the FDA kicked out a document called the Content of Pre-Market Submissions for Management of Cybersecurity in Medical Devices. To summarize, it basically said medical devices should be secure. We like puppies, unicorns are cute, and we're giving you no guidance on how to achieve this or what our expectations are. Literally, that's what a guidance document's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way for them to communicate their expectations, and it was very poorly done. It was a huge disservice to industry because we didn't know what to do. So in some cases, people were doing nothing. In other cases, people were doing too much, and you couldn't right size and hit the Goldilocks zone because there wasn't enough guidance. A couple of years after that, in 2016, the FDA kicked out the post-market management of cybersecurity in medical devices, a much better document. In this document, they said, once you release this to the public, once it's approved and it's out in the public, you still have responsibilities that you have to do for cybersecurity. And they really went through and stipulated it well in there. They did a much better job of it. Then in 2018, they kicked out a new version of the pre-market submission guideline that was extremely pedantic. It went through and it detailed in great clarity what their expectations were, what their expectations have been, and what they expected to see coming from the medical device industry before they were going to allow a device to be marketed. That draft has also faded, and they're going to do a second spin of that draft here, presidential election and COVID allowing, here in this year, 2020. Mostly it is a reformatting operation. They are changing their risk tiering structure, and some of the terminology like likelihood is being removed out of the document. But that's basically it. If you read the 2018 one, all of the content that's there, and it is badly formatted in the 2018 draft guidance, is going to be in the new 2021. It's just going to be organized a lot better. So for those who don't know and aren't familiar with dealing with FDA, whenever they say they have a guidance or guideline document, that really means it's a requirement. It's like it's a guidance for you as a medical device manufacturer, but for them to approve your device, it's a requirement. And draft means current FDA expectations. And in fact, in the case of what's in the 2018 guidance, easily a year before that was published, this was the of activities and deliverables they expected to see in submissions. And I have a very good role because I get to see all of the things that have gone wrong from our clients. So if we've had a client that comes to us and says, oh, we've got our device rejected, and that's when we get involved, we get to see things like 483s, rejection letters, all of the warnings, all of that come back. And into all those vehicles, they're extremely accurate in what they say. Oh, you didn't have a threat model. You weren't authenticating. You had default passwords. But they go through and call these things out exactly. So you know that's what they're looking for, even though, once again, they didn't bother to tell people ahead of time, this is what we're looking for. And so they found out the hard way. So all of this stuff has been in play for quite some time. So really look at these documents as what they are, a good communication medium to let you understand what the FDA's attitude is and what they're going to insist upon before you can market your device. What is this applicable to? Virtually everything that you do for pre-market submissions. I've had clients come to me and say, well, we have a special 510K. So we don't have to do security. It's like, nope, you do. This is applicable to basically everything. In fact, even IDEs, they state that you need to be cyber secure before going out into a hospital situation. So if you think that you're exempt from this somehow, you're not. And to give you an idea of just how extreme that is, check the date on that, March 2020. Here is the enforcement policy for ventilators that came out of the FDA. This document, if you've read it, is basically a document that says if you've got something that kind of looks like a ventilator and kind of acts like a ventilator, we're not going to enforce any rules about this. All hands off. We need ventilators. And so they were turning CPAP and BiPAP, and I mean, they almost were going to the vacuum cleaner level here. That's how much they were just dropping all enforcement for anything with a ventilator. But still, inside that document, even given that, where all of the safety was pulled out, they go in and make a comment about, yeah, but you still have to have cybersecurity controls in place on here. So even for someone like me, that almost looks to be too much. I mean, some of this stuff we need rushed out to the marketplace, but I get it. They don't want attackers to take advantage of COVID and the poor patients that attack them at their most vulnerable time. So what's in that new guidance? Well, they kind of break it up into three major areas. The security labeling, the IFU, your user manual, the documentation that needs to be included in the submission package for pre-market, and then trustworthy device design requirements. So I'll go into here. There are 14 new areas of coverage that's supposed to be in your IFU, in your manual. Describe the handling of software field updates, 38 new design mitigations. These are requirements for things they want to see implemented in your device. For a tier security assignment, 20 new detailed security artifacts generated during development lifecycle that will be included in your pre-market submission package. Software bill of materials, we'll go into that more in a little more detail here. Specific protection mechanisms should prevent all unauthorized use through all interfaces. That doesn't just mean to humans, that means device to device too. And lastly, all these security documents are part of your normal document tree. There would be traceability matrices out to things such as requirements, detailed designs, and hazard analysis. So it's now, it's got a seat at the table now, security. It's not something that we hide behind the curtain with anymore. I'm not going to go through these in detail. Feel free to go get the 2018 guidance and read through section 5. But those 38 design requirements I was talking about here, I just wanted to show them so you get an idea of what it is they're looking for here. And all of these are to be implemented with cryptographically significant mitigations. This is not a CRC or a checksum or parity bit or something like that, or, oh, I've got a proprietary protocol, so it's secure. Nope, you've got to prove that you're using good, strong crypto primitives to enforce security. So if the FDA isn't enough for you, the rest of the world has followed along in suit, and we have rules that affect IoT and medical IoT devices all over the planet now in individual states, and the EU's GDPR, California security bill, FTC got into the action, and they just like to crush companies by suing them into oblivion. All of these ITSIs, INSAs, the MDRs that were supposed to be enabled here this month have been pushed back 1 year to 2021, but they're also in consideration of cybersecurity. And Canada and Australia specifically have all their cybersecurity requirements for medical devices. So yeah, if it's not already obvious, you've got to go through and make a secure product. So since creating insecure medical devices is no longer an option, this provokes a few questions that I see over and over again, such as, what are we protecting? What do we have to do? In other words, they're looking to do the minimum. The minimum is still quite a lot, and I'm going to kind of encourage you not to do the minimum for a couple of reasons. What should we be doing? Well, this speaks to the minimum. If you look at any of these regulations, they're all focused on patient safety and efficacy. But the reality is, besides the moral compunction you should have to enforce safety and efficacy of the patient, you're also in a business that wants to survive. So the should be doing is not just looking at safety and efficacy, but looking at a bigger picture. We'll go into that in a minute. What artifacts need to be created during development for submission, for your customers, for yourself, for the next project you do, for the maintenance you need to do on this? How do we incorporate these activities into our existing processes with minimum pain? It should say. And how do we manage these new activities? And how can we minimize the delays this introduces to development? So let's start with the first one. What are we protecting? The risks. We've been focused here so far on this, on the regulatory aspects of cybersecurity and medical devices, but there is a much broader area of focus that should be performed by the MDM. Really, excuse me, I'm using jargon, medical device manufacturer, MDM. Information security is really about protecting the business model of the MDM. Yes, killing patients is bad for business. Safety and efficacy matters. It matters not only to protect your business model, but it also matters for moral reasons. So safety and efficacy is in there, but also intellectual property theft, such as via physical attacks against the product or firmware field upgrades as they exist in the product that can easily be intercepted and in most cases reverse engineered. Cloning of durable or consumable products. Maybe your business model relies on the fact that you have some sort of consumable device. You don't want that cloned and somebody undercutting you in the market with something that's cheaper. Re-enabling use of consumable products following end of life. Believe it or not, in some countries, people intercept trash and re-enable some of those consumable products so they get another period of time of use out of them, or at least that's what they think. Certainly loss of consumer confidence, bad PR. You don't, you want to be on 60 Minutes for doing good things like what we did in Kokomo, not for bad things like you have a device that's killing people. Weaponizing of products to attack other entities. So just because you have a medical device and somebody hacks into it in a hospital, maybe it doesn't affect the therapy it's delivering to the patient, but can they use your device to pivot into the rest of the network in the hospital and attack other devices and other infrastructure? There's actually a lot of liability law going into that now in contract language, talking about who's liable when your device gets weaponized because you didn't do the proper security. Exposure of sensitive information and files such as GDPR, HIPAA, California Federal Trade Commission. All those, sure, we know about that. You can't expose patient health information, PHI. And once again, safety and efficacy. So this is not the usual attack surface. Embedded medical device cybersecurity has many differences with a traditional MIS or IT cybersecurity enforcement. They're mostly interested in looking at logs, detecting an attack that has occurred or one that is in progress, and trying to figure out how to block it. And there are waves and different attacks come at different periods and different ransomware hits you at different points. We don't have any of that. We're not going to be seeing logs. Most likely, even if we do have logs, they're not going to be coming back when the device is being attacked. There's no sharing of attack information. It really doesn't help much. What we're looking for is not threats against us, but vulnerabilities. More on that in a second. Medical devices taken as a whole are a very large attack surface and getting larger every day. And most medical devices have resource constraints such as power, memory, cryptographic capability. They're vulnerable to physical attacks and reverse engineering. You don't let somebody in an IT environment walk through your server farm. Well, unfortunately, they have access to your medical devices 24/7, can attack them at their leisure in their basement. Medical devices are much more difficult to update and to patch for security issues. It's not like a PC or a smartphone. They're very difficult to get in access to them and perform updates in a way that's secure. I mean, you really wouldn't want to be on a ventilator when a company decides to push out a software update and it has to reset. So there is also one other thing that really has to be pointed out, and it's a very common mistake. In a lot of industries, we use things like mean time between failure and likelihood as a metric for looking at it, especially in quality. And that bridge there is rusting at a predictable rate. You can, with quite a bit of reliability, estimate when that bridge is going to fall into the river below it because of the rate of rust. But that's because it's a naturally occurring process. If rust became sentient with malicious intent and said, instead we're going to focus all of our oxidation here on this one girder, all forms of mean time between failure and likelihood are worthless. Wherever there's malicious intent, you can't assign likelihood. The metrics that you need to know about are severity and exploitability. How bad is it? And can they actually exploit this and use this vulnerability? A couple of things about the people involved here. We have thought processes that are basically different between an engineer and a hacker. A hacker is a single focused type of person who's probing on multiple avenues of attack with the intent of finding a vulnerability that can be exploited. If one approach doesn't work, they'll back out and try another one and keep trying another one. But your typical engineer has hundreds, if not thousands, of design considerations and requirements to meet, and certainly doesn't want any new ones to look at. So don't expect your engineers to have exposure to any aspect of cybersecurity. It's not their fault. They haven't been trained in this for the most part. This is a very new field in a lot of ways. And in my experience, finding good engineers who also understand security and the tools utilized to make a device secure are extremely rare. Don't assume your engineers know this already and they're doing the proper things. They really don't, and they really don't want more constraints and more requirements to implement. So before we go a little farther, I've used some terms here already in this presentation, and I'd like to define a couple of them. One of them, and the most important one, is a vulnerability. That's a weakness in a product that could allow an attacker to compromise the integrity, availability, or confidentiality of that product. Think, like in this case, a hole in a chain link fence. That's a vulnerability. Doesn't mean anybody's going through it, but it's still there. So what can we do? Well, we can apply mitigations. Now, a mitigation is a change that reduces the severity, seriousness, or impact of a vulnerability. And notice I didn't say fixes, I said reduces. So not all mitigations are the same. They're not all 2%, 100%, 80%. Different mitigations get you different places. So I could put bungee cords across this fence. That's a pretty poor mitigation, but it's sort of along the lines of some of the mitigations you use in cybersecurity. If you obfuscate your mobile application, you're putting bungee cords across it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means by itself, it's not very good and not very effective as a mitigation. But if I layered another fence behind that one, now we're getting into some decent mitigations. Now we've got something going for us, and maybe even better, we'll put a vicious dog behind the whole thing. And now we have multiple mitigations, or what is called defense in depth. So what we are after here as developers is different than in an IT environment. What we are looking for are vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities are created in 3 places during the development lifecycle. They're during design, they're during implementation, and they're in the use of third-party software components. What is typically referred to as SOUP, a term I hate because it's not very descriptive, but you know what we're talking about: libraries, frameworks, operating systems that are used in your devices. So for us in the embedded domain, what we are looking for are the vulnerabilities to assess which ones are the most important and the most critical, and mitigate those ones to a point where the residual risk of those vulnerabilities is lowered to an acceptable level in each one of them. So each of these 3 areas need different tools and different processes to catch these vulnerabilities. So because these terms like threats and vulnerabilities has unfortunately been used incorrectly in many examples, let me give you some examples of what they are. So like a design vulnerability would be no authentication for a user to access the device, or no integrity checking of a stream of data, no encryption of PHI. Those are all design vulnerabilities. Now, an implementation vulnerability didn't enforce the length of an input buffer, used intrinsic functions, used scanf and FS scanf format strings that didn't provide a field for the %s string. Third-party software component vulnerabilities. These are things like Heartbleed and Urgent 11 and Swentooth that have recently come out, but you get to own them. Even though you didn't write them, you used the product, and with it came the vulnerability. Threats, ransomware, worms, denial of service, physical and side channel attacks. Those are threats. Exploits are things like CryptoLocker, that's a form of ransomware. NotPetya, that's a form of ransomware. Zcryptor, also ransomware. SynFlood, denial of service. Sasser, it's a worm. So those are the different terms, and it's important to know the terms, because otherwise you really can't think about and address this topic unless you realize we're not, as medical device manufacturers and developers, after threats. We're after vulnerabilities. Design vulnerabilities, implementation vulnerabilities, and third-party software component vulnerabilities. Thanks to HISAC, the Lifecycle Management Working Group. This is an overview of the medical device developers' development lifecycle and the HDO, the health delivery organizations, your hospitals, clinics, and physicians, and how you interrelate to them in the sense of a total product lifecycle. There are things that are new here they're not used to seeing. And in fact, let's zoom in on the stuff. We're going to ignore the healthcare delivery organization for the most part, other than the fact that you can see mitigations are going out to it and you're delivering security artifacts at the time of procurement. Those are important, but for our purposes, we're just going to focus on the medical device manufacturer activities. Well, the large ring there that you see is pretty similar to what we've done for the last 20, 30 years and how we've developed devices. Now we're starting to add in new things, such as we release it, we create a software bill of materials, we maintain that, we do post-market surveillance, as it's called out in the post-market guidance document from the FDA, which means we're taking that software bill of materials and looking for disclosed vulnerabilities. Based upon what vulnerabilities we find after that is in the field, we do vulnerability management, coordinated disclosure. That's where you go out and you inform your users. If a security researcher came to you with this vulnerability, you keep them in the loop. It's a coordinated way to inform your user base of what the status is. It could be, oh, we're triaging it. We don't know. We just found out about this. Or it could be, no, we know exactly what it is. Here's a patch for it. This is how you update your system. So you have software updates and these go round and round. That's going on all the time. That has nothing to do with the development lifecycle. Once that gets developed and released, you still have to do maintenance on it. Likewise, disclosures are going to feed back now into your approved supplier list. Instead of just availability and cost and quality and those type of things before that were used in an ASL, now we're also including security. So as we look at this, we go, did they give us a really buggy product? Did we have lots of security issues? If there were these, how responsive were they in giving us patches, fixes, and working with us to fix these issues of these third-party software components that have been supplied to us? So all of this gets factored in, and on the next design loop that goes through, maybe we won't use them again if they weren't very good. Maybe we'll look for an alternate supplier. So all of these things now have to start to be considered, and including the black one at the bottom of the development lifecycle, which is end of life, something that a lot of devices are never thought about during design and development of, but we now have to give the tools to the users of these, that at the end of their life, they can have all of the information that's buffered in them safely deleted so that it doesn't go to someone else. So what does a design vulnerability assessment process look like? How do we do this? Remember I said there were 3 areas: design, implementation, and third-party software components. During design, we we decompose the topology and all of the component details of any of the custom devices in the medical device system. And those get put into a tool that is like the tool from Microsoft, that's the threat modeling tool, where you lay out these components and automatically, using an algorithm called STRIDE, it decomposes these diagrams and their data flow elements that are in that diagram into a list of possible vulnerabilities. Right? There's some abstraction because of the way STRIDE works. So there's a fairly decently high amount of false positives, but we're going to eliminate those as we go to the next step, where we take that list of possible vulnerabilities and we go through and we score them in light of the use case. So you've got a Bluetooth low energy interface on this thing, and it's used to report the battery status of your automatic external defibrillator. That same Bluetooth interface is a whole lot different if it's instead is determining how much energy is going to be released by that external defibrillator when it hits a patient. So that's a good example of a use case. Same topologies, same communications, different use case. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. As we go through, we score that and say, well, what does this interface do? What does this process do? We use a modified version of CVSS version 2, their common vulnerability scoring system. It's not a good scoring system for threats, but it's actually a very good scoring system for vulnerabilities. So based upon the scoring out of that CVSS scoring activity, we then go out and review the high scoring vulnerabilities for mitigations, create mitigations for them where possible, and implement those mitigations. We rescore those same vulnerabilities now in light of the mitigations and hopefully lowering the score down, and we expose any residual vulnerabilities that don't get lowered down to an acceptable level. And as a result of that, we then document all of those high scoring vulnerabilities, all of those mitigations, in this case in the paper trail that you see here on the right of the screen, into the system security architecture. And then the tracing goes out there into your product requirements and design, out to the risk management systems. We also create, as part of the security process, a final system security report where you expose any residual vulnerabilities that you know you have. As an example, this is an example of what a system would look like inside of the Stride tool where you have this. A typical system like this would probably generate out 200 to 300 potential vulnerabilities. It is a formal method of decomposition. It is much better than doing things such as whiteboarding ideas or using attack trees. Those tools only work if you're a cybersecurity expert. And even then, like I am, nobody's 100%. I really always hate, I'll have clients come to me and say, hey, we've got this system. Can you tell us where the vulnerability is going? And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yes, I can to a large degree, but the correct way is to do a formal decomposition and have it cover everything. Make certain you've done your due diligence. Make certain you don't miss anything, okay? Because remember, attackers are looking for that one thread in, and they'll find it if you've missed it. So you want good coverage. And if I'm just putting ideas up on a whiteboard or making pretty attack trees that don't really tell me what I'm supposed to do, but it documents my thinking, there's no way to know how good your coverage is. Second area, implementation. What do you do during implementation? Well, one of the things you do is you don't wait for it to be done. All of these activities for security are done concurrent with the implementation. So you'll go through and do fuzz testing. All right, fuzz testing is an automated black box software testing technique that involves providing invalid, unexpected, or random data as input into communications channels as the device is monitored for unexpected behavior. It generates semi-valid inputs that are valid enough that are not immediately rejected, but they're looking for things and conditions that haven't been accounted for in the driver or in the application level code. And if you spend more time on fuzz testing, the more confident you are that that communications interface is secure. This is valid for serial ports, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Bluetooth low energy, web APIs. All of these protocols and more all benefit from having fuzz tests run against them and identified. So you do the fuzz testing as soon as you possibly can. As the development team finishes that web app or that BLE interface, you then immediately start doing fuzz testing on it and immediately feeding back to the development team in bug tracking reports where there's issues. Likewise, there's penetration testing. Penetration testing is hacker for hire. Well, at Velentium, we've innovated a new approach to this. Unfortunately, penetration testing is at the end of the development lifecycle. Your device is done, it's in the box, and as you're ready to just go out and get approval for it, you send it out, and a security researcher team that you've hired 6 or 7 weeks later comes back with a huge report of all the design vulnerabilities and all the implementation vulnerabilities and all your third-party software component vulnerabilities that they found, and you don't have the time or the budget to fix them. So micro-penetration testing is a change in how this is performed. Concurrent with development, as parts are finished, oh, I finished that user interface, I finished that communication interface, and those things are done, they're released to third-party software experts, security experts like myself, that will do scoping of attacks only to that area that is finished or a release candidate. So we'll go through and feed that immediately back to you. We won't hit the other part. So if you've got a Wi-Fi interface and an Ethernet interface, we're just attacking the Wi-Fi for this test. We'll get to the Ethernet later, but all we're giving you back is attacks against that, for instance. Secure static analysis, or SAST, is very similar to traditional scanners such as Lint, except where those were not that useful and generated a whole lot of worthless data. The SASTs of today are much better, and Parasoft's SAST is outstanding. And these scanners are focused on identifying only security weaknesses in the implemented software. And they're based on such standards as CERT Secure C, which are already highly reviewed standards of secure coding standards in their source code. These will go through and identify them, flag them for you, and even call out the rule and show you the line of code that you've offended. So you can quickly do it. Don't wait till the end to do it. Run early, run often. Unit boundary testing. As your code is done, this is a form of unit test where any passed parameters into your device. So let's say you have a assigned int 16 that's being passed in and you expect a value between 5 and 1,000 in that variable. What happens if you get 4? What happens if you get -3? What happens if you get 1,001? These are stress testing the anticipated values. Parasoft has a lovely scanner for doing this. It is easy to set up. It is easy to run. You can run it virtualized. You can run it on hardware. So all of these things are really, really nice, and they're excellent Parasoft tools for doing these kind of work. Also, I really didn't mention the Parasoft Fuzz testing for the web APIs. Also excellent. They work in conjunction with the Burp Suite and do just a great job of tying all this together. Here's an example of the Parasoft dashboard, for instance, to give you an idea of an OWASP.NET app. Okay, how the violations are going. This is a single pane of glass type of approach to it. So you can quickly see as a project manager where your project sits, and you know how far you are from being done. So if something like this, you see this, you go, we're not releasing tomorrow. Okay, 602 violations. Okay, pretty bad here. All right, 72 critical. So these are the type of things that allow you to really run your project smooth, because you get to see all of this, whether it's per project, whether it's across all the projects, you get to see specifics, and you can create your own dashboards to analyze how you want to see what it is you're looking at. I want to see these 2 projects. I want to see all the projects. I just want to see the CERT C stuff. And this gives you a real fast way to look and know where in the development lifecycle that code really is. Okay. They have one of the best static code analysis engines out there. They basically do compliance reporting for UL 2900, CWE, OWASP, CERT, as I've previously mentioned, both C and C++. They have really great tools to help manually create and execute unit tests. All right, these actually can be pulled or even taken out of spreadsheets. So if you have them, so you already know what the values are that are anticipated and supposed to be typical, for instance, in a boundary analysis, it can be pulled out. These can also be used for fuzz testing as well at that same point. So very easy ways to go into even API testing, as I alluded to here, both the securing part of it and the testing and the robustness and responsiveness of the APIs. Integration with Burp Suite also allows strong API testing and offerings. So you can also create secure sandboxes to isolate the application under test from external dependencies, such as hardware drivers, third-party APIs, etc., if you want just pure software evaluations. This is actually a real report that for one of our clients anonymized here, but it gives you an idea. This is why I say run SAST early, run often. You don't want nasty surprises at the end of your development. This is what these people did. They came on, oh, we're done with the code. It's like, no, you don't. All right, this is not what you want to do. You want to repeat these when these are single-digit numbers, and as you're writing the code, whatever your build cycle is in your CI system, you want to include this into it. We at Velentium offer this as a service to our clients, but I highly recommend them to just buy Parasoft and incorporate it into their build cycle. It really saves you a lot of pain and suffering in your project to do this and spread it out over the course of the project. It's kind of like lower the curve, if you know what I mean. Same with text execution. Beautiful, beautiful runs. We get to see what the coverage was, how well they worked out, all complete feedback on how well the test coverage is going at any given time. Summaries here that we're looking back here, coming back out of Burp Suite, what we're finding. And even across the entire CI, what it looks like and all the development as we go across here, all has panes of glass into it that you can define and highly customize so you can see any aspect of the development cycle. So real quickly here, I mentioned third-party software components. You create an SBOM, you monitor things such as the National Vulnerability Database, You review this impact and you do this on a quarterly basis. You do this before you release the product. You do this on a quarterly basis after the product is released for the life of the product. Velentium offers this as a service because we do it for so many different clients that for us, it's economies of scale. It's easy for us. But this is how you define it. Now, quick dive off into SBOMs here. SBOMs are really just a list of third-party software components that are being utilized in a specific version of the software. So as you update and create new versions of that software, there may be new versions of some of your libraries, frameworks, and operating systems that you've included in here. But this effort to utilize SBOMs for vulnerability management is the result of 4 working groups at NTIA, a department inside the Department of Commerce. And this is what is being adopted by the FDA for how SBOMs are to be created, shared, and utilized by health delivery organizations. There are multiple uses for SBOMs. Vulnerability monitoring is just one of them, and that's the one that's highlighted here in orange. There's other things such as license that you don't want any nasty surprises, like having a license that requires you to release to the public your source code, for instance. So there's all sorts of uses for it, but for our talk here, we're just talking about vulnerability and how we go through here. This would be extremely useful. You may have heard recently of things like Urgent 11, which had a software component called IPNet buried many levels down. Many manufacturers didn't even know they were using it. Green Hill Software is a good example of that. Certainly Wind River was the first to announce it, but there was quite a few using it that didn't even know that because they didn't have an SBOM to even expose to the manufacturer that they were using it. That's what the advantage is. It's not only to your clients, but it's also to you. You can then find out if you've got an issue. Sventooth was a whole raft of vulnerabilities released about Bluetooth low energy stacks. Many manufacturers didn't even know what they were using inside of there. Again, an SBOM would solve all that for them. It would also allow their customers to understand what was in the product and take initial triaging efforts if necessary. So what is in an SBOM? Well, the author's name, the supplier's name, they may not be the same, the component name of what you're using, a version, there's an unstructured string that can be put in there for that particular version, a component hash of a SHA-256, in other words, of the executable itself, because a lot of things can, especially open source, have meta symbols that can be turned on to have different compiles. So, you're using OpenSSL, but depending upon how you set it up, you're going to get different executables. So this allows you to uniquely identify how you configured it for its use. A unique identifier, that could be a version 4 or 5 UUID, just to help identify components, and the relationship of the components inside of here. So you may have a Log4j, a very popular logging package. It has 294 subdependencies. So as you list those, you would show them as dependents to Log4j. Examples of what they look like in a machine readable format. There are multiple formats, including Cyclone DX, SPDX, and SWID, SWID. They all of them have their pluses and minuses of which to use, but they're all markup languages such as JSON and XML. Lastly, what is generated as artifacts. All the text in green here is stuff that is called out in the guidance document that the FDA wants to see in a submission. Everything in blue are the vehicles that we put them in here. Assuming you're using a paper trail, we have system plan to system security report and everything in between, and how we package all this up, including an SBOM in the system security report. And lastly, I'd like to thank you for your time and any questions you might have. I'd also like to point out that the first of its kind book on medical device cybersecurity will be coming out here in August. And it was co-written by my friend Jason Smith and Axel Worth. And so we just finally submitted it here a couple of weeks ago to the publishing house, Artex. So if you want more information, you can pre-order.
Great, thank you very much, Christopher. Do you want to just go ahead and stop sharing for a second? Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much, Dan and Christopher. please remember, folks, go ahead and put questions into the Q&A box. We've got a couple of ones here to go through real quick. Just a couple of follow-ons. Obviously, you know, if we're talking about how we can help you guys get up and running and get the products deployed, how we can help with the general process. Obviously, Velentium is your primary point of contact there. Ben will be the guy to reach out to. Likewise, if you're just interested in the tools themselves, then Dave Hauk on the Parasoft side is actually leading that initiative. When you talk to David, you know, reference this webinar. We are actually running a promotion right now into the medical device space. So for the next 90 days, there'll be a promotion available there. So reach out to David on that. And obviously, you know, we'll be talking about how we can kind of bring these two solutions together, or bring that, should I say, use Velentium to implement the Parasoft solution as we go through those follow-ons. Also, there is a page on the Parasoft website around their medical device solutions. And actually, the solution we're going to see a lot talked about within that page is going to be the C++ test for C and C++ development. As Christopher referenced, we have technologies that do cover a very wide plethora of interfaces and programming languages. We also have our .test product for doing safety and security analysis for .NET applications. So feel free to reach out to the team. As I said, both Dan and Dave will be taking point. And with that being said, let's go ahead and turn over to questions. I got one question here, a couple of obvious ones. Yes, the session is being recorded, so recording will be sent shortly after this, as well as slides as well. So we'll be doing slides as a follow-up. Also, do watch out for other emails from Parasoft. We are running a series of webinars right now talking about compliance-driven initiatives across safety-critical industries. So, you know, tune into that, and you'll also be able to get access to the webinar archive on our website. Okay, so this question here is, how do I get started when my project is already well underway? Okay, this sounds like a very typical scenario that we come across, not just in medical, but also in automotive as well. The kind of startup organization, get it, you know, building some software, and then going, oops, we now need to have compliance. Dan, Christopher, do you want to talk to that?
I'll take that. Yeah, this is a real problem. And this falls under the category of legacy device. And I always say a legacy device is something you just released. It's, you know, it's a day old, it's now legacy. But legacy devices, and in medical device development, it's a very typical pattern to take an existing device you already have and make a slight increase and re-release it. Unfortunately, that previous device may not have been designed in with the resources and the capabilities to actually be secured. Likewise, for a device that's currently in development lifecycle, you also have the same problem, is that you may have decided to use a 20-year-old processor or something that's easily hackable inside of your device and has no security provisions. These can be very difficult. And when I asked actually Dr. Suzanne Schwartz of the FDA about these things, in both cases, her answer is it doesn't matter. We have to stop this. We have to stop this chain of insecure devices. So we need them to be secure. In other words, you cannot continue to do this. So I recommend that you bring in security as early as possible into your design development lifecycle at the beginning. Simple things that can be changed there can make huge differences in the impacts to the user experience and to the security of your overall project, and won't land you in trouble with the FDA or other regulatory bodies.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Christopher. There's another one here, which actually sits more on our side. So I'll answer this and then kind of invite you to comment. It's asking about, does Parasoft provide any technology for traceability? So traceability is obviously a key component of safety critical industries and compliance requirements. What we do is through the reporting dashboard that Christopher talked about and showed you the screenshot of, that actually has integrations with external requirements test management, and also agile planning systems as well. So kind of Codebeamer, Polarian, for example, as well as actually Jira as well. So we can send test results into those external systems of record. We can also consume the list of requirements or stories and create traceability reporting within the reporting and analytics dashboard. And actually, the reporting and analytics dashboard is not just a bunch of pretty graphs and charts. You can actually get right down into the details of the data that sits behind the test results. And as you're triaging that, you can actually create additional work items, defects, or issues in those external systems as well. Did you, Christopher, did you want to talk to traceability requirements in medical devices at all, or anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, it's obviously extremely important. And when I first started getting involved 10 years ago with security in medical devices, everybody kept all of the deliverables and all of the artifacts in a very secure location. We weren't even putting it in design history files. It was basically, lock it up in a vault type of a thing. And I remember taking senior leadership into a closed and locked room to review security vulnerabilities with them. Well, that's all changed. Now everything is on the table. Now exposure and transparency is paramount. So we not only expose all this stuff, we traced all this stuff. So these are the things we found. These are how we fix them. And this is where it traces into all the rest of your normal documentary, including the hazard analysis.
Great, thank you. We're actually at time now, but there's kind of one more question we'll answer. I do see other ones coming in. We'll respond to those one-on-one as well. The question is around testing of AI applications, Dockerized cloud deployed AI applications. So typically what you're looking at there is, at the end of the day, depends on what the code is. If you've got code that's written in Java, C++, or .NET, then obviously you can use the same kind of SAST tools to do the code analysis. But often when we're talking about cloud-based platforms, we start talking about testing of programmatic APIs, so RESTful services, things like that. Obviously, you're not running on the device now, you're running on a cloud-based machine. So the same testing practices do apply, but it really depends on the specifics of what you're building. There is a lot of conversation right now in the industry as to how to test AI applications. I don't think there's really some great definitive answers, to be quite frank. I was at the Embedded World Conference this year, 2 papers on the topic, and neither of them came to a really good conclusion. A lot of it is leveraging the same kind of practices that you're already leveraging today. So having stable regression suites, leveraging test sets, so kind of data that you can predictably have the AI engine should produce a certain set of results, or results that are in a range. Certainly testing of AI, you have to be a little bit more comfortable with data coming back in some kind of range rather than necessarily a discrete answer, because if the AI system is a learning system. Christopher, I don't know, do you have any background on AI testing and kind of within your team? Anything you wanted to add there before we close out?
Only as used to create rules that are embedded in devices, yes. But as far as what this question is, which is about in the cloud environment, this is more like using a third-party software component. You don't get the chance to necessarily fix whatever is underlying as a risk. So you go through and harden your cloud environment to whichever particular platform you're using, to the standards they've come up with. As far as your web API, Parasoft has you there with their systems that you can check that communication and stress test that. But the AI itself, no, that's very difficult. And that's why it has been so long that the FDA has not allowed that type of structure in a medical device, is because they are so difficult to validate. And so as a result of that, it's not. I mean, humorously, the only thing I can come up with in saying we need an AI tester to test an AI application. So.
Yes, as I said, there is lots of conversation in the industry right now as to how to reliably test these systems, especially as they evolve, and your test suite needs to somewhat evolve or take that evolution into account.
Right.
So, and we actually are taking AI ourselves and applying it to our own technology. So we actually have applied AI to both API testing, web UI testing, and we're actually doing a webinar in a few weeks around testing or applying AI to the results of static analysis and kind of triaging that. So kind of watch out for that. With that being said, we have run a little bit over, so I'll say thank you to everybody for joining. Christopher, Dan, thank you very much for today's presentation. Some great content. We're really excited about this partnership with Parasoft. So thank you guys, and thank you everybody for joining. Great, have a great rest of your day and stay safe.
Thank you for your time, everyone. Stay safe.